Good evening and welcome to the Everett City Council Finance and Budget Committee meeting. Today is August 29th and we have
August 30th.
August 30th, thank you. We have a few items on our agenda this evening. And we've got today with us Susie Haugen, our Finance Director, and Heidi Berlantes, the Budget Manager. So welcome, and I think I'll just let you kick us off.
Okay, thank you very much, and good afternoon. Tonight, we'll start with the July financial report, followed by the revised 2023 and 2024 general government revenue forecast, and then an update on the 2024 general government balancing process. And Heidi is going to provide our July financial report.
Perfect. Good afternoon, Mayor. Good afternoon, Council. Today we'll start with the general government revenues for as of end of July. General government revenues continue to come in strong this year. Total revenues through July are $6.5 million or 6.4% over budget on a year-to-date basis. Sales, business and occupation, and utility taxes are the main contributors to this positive performance. Sales tax receipts are $1.7 million or 8.2% above the original forecast. Construction, retail, accommodation, and food services sectors account for 95% of our excess receipts. Construction is over the original forecast by $741,000 or 20.7%. Retail is over by $647,000 or 7.1%. And accommodation and food services is over by $209,000 or 11%. Sure.
If you don't mind, while do you have any sense of the balance in construction between commercial and residential?
You know, I think it is probably pretty close. We do have a significant amount of residential construction going on, predominantly multifamily, but we also have a significant amount of commercial alterations going on. So as we see in the monthly reports that we receive from the permit department, we're seeing quite a variety.
Moving on to business and occupation tax, receipts are over $1.2 million above our original forecast, or 9.3%. The main contributor here, no surprise, is the aerospace sector, and more than $1 million of the excess receipts are attributed to our business tax team's compliance efforts. Utility tax receipts are $722,000 or 8.6% above our original forecast. Natural gas, telephone, and electricity utility taxes account for 87% of those excess receipts. Natural gas utility tax is over the original forecast by $269,000 or 21%. Telephone utility tax is over by $171,000 or 27%. And electricity utility tax is over by $189,000 or 4.3%. We now turn to general government expenditures. As of July 31st, expenditures are under budget by $3.5 million or 3.9%. There are 5 funds that are running slightly above budget. We do anticipate that most of these funds will trend back to budget as the year progresses, but we will continue to watch for any possible amendments at the end of the year. At this time, we are certain that we will need a budget amendment to increase jail services expenditures as well as general fund contributions to our self-insurance programs, and that includes property and liability insurance premiums, workers' compensation, and tort claims.
And Heidi, are you, from the revenue piece in particular, because I understand the expenses you're thinking will be trending back to budget, but on the revenue, are these timing differences or are these actual permanent increases in the revenue over what we had budgeted?
They appear to be permanent increases, so jail services especially are trending more than we had forecasted for the '23 original budget. And Susie will speak more to it as how it's going to affect our 2024 operating budget.
Okay.
And the self-insurance will also play into that.
Great, thank you.
That does conclude our briefing on the July monthly financial report. If there are any questions, we'd like to answer them now before we move on to the revenue forecast.
Any questions?
No, that's good.
That's good news.
Okay, and now we will continue with our revenue forecast update. I want to start with some background on our annual reforecast process. We start in July so that we have 6 months of recent history to inform the forecast. Each line item is looked at individually, and with sales tax and B&O tax, we take it down to the individual industry categories. We incorporate both broad and Everett-specific economic factors based on information we gather through research and webinars and economic newsletters. Inflation, Federal Reserve actions to curb inflation, the real estate market, and consumer debt headline broad concerns for this year. New businesses operating in Everett or around Everett, business closures, current trends for existing businesses, population growth, and updates to our service fees represent some of the key Everett-specific factors that we take into consideration. Budget maintains various revenue models that update the forecasts monthly based on actual receipts. However, each year we undertake a major reforecast in July that begins with the 2023 revenue budget. As we've been reporting in the monthly financial reports, revenues are coming in strong this year, and we do see most of that as not a timing issue, but more of an ongoing broad activity in and around our area. Based on the year-to-date activity, we revised the original forecast up by $8 million or 5.4%. And again, the strength we are seeing is fairly broad-based, which is a positive indication for Everett's economy. However, there are a couple of notable standouts that Heidi touched on in her briefing. Sales tax has led the way in 2023 and is now forecast to finish the year by $2.5 million over the budget, due largely to robust activity in retail and construction. B&O tax is also performing well, with the aerospace sector figuring prominently. We estimate that B&O tax will finish the year $1.6 million over budget, and construction permits and related fees are also reforecast to bring in another $1.2 million in additional revenue over the original budget. You know, and as for the 2024 forecast, I do want to note that this is not a recessionary forecast. And although there still appears to be some level of concern on the part of some economists, we are seeing fairly consistent shift towards the expectation that the Fed will actually achieve a soft landing as it works to reduce inflation. Looking towards '24, we are forecasting $11.7 million or a 7.8% growth over the original '23 budget. While 4.7 of that 11.7 million is due to one-time transfers from the COVID relief fund and grants, the remaining 7 million is generally related to growing economic activity that we're seeing in Everett. All of the four major revenue categories include a continuation of the growth we have experienced thus far this year. So sales tax, B&O tax, utility tax, and construction permits.
Vice President Tui has a question.
Susie, I know that, there we go. I know that the port doesn't pay all of the fees that the rest of the city does, but if you can explain what they do with their businesses, B&O and sales tax. I know property tax is different. I'm just curious, 'cause I know there's been so much growth down there. I'm just curious, trying to remember how it works.
Of course. So we do receive B&O tax and sales tax from the businesses that are located down on the port property. The difference that you're probably thinking of is in property tax. And to the extent that private businesses are located on port property, the port has to pay leasehold tax on the value of the lease, and they do not pay property tax, however. So for port property where there is no private use of that property, they do not pay any property tax as a port district.
Okay. So, but that would include the residents as well as the businesses down there?
To the extent that the port retains ownership of the land, that would impact that. However, my understanding is that most of the land down there is reverting to private ownership.
And if it's private ownership, then they do pay property tax?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you for
And Susie,
clarifying.
remind me, we at one point did a little analysis of that leasehold tax, and we determined that it wasn't quite as robust as our property tax rates. Is that correct?
At that time, the analysis did suggest that. I mean, that's been a number
been
of
a
years
while,
now,
yeah,
so
yeah.
we would need to take another look at that and we can always do that.
And then do they pay into the voter approved taxes, the EMS levy or any of that?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so while we are taking an optimistic approach to the general government forecast, we do acknowledge that there are risks that could require course correction if we see a pullback in revenues next year. Forecasts are inherently risky, and at this point, we see both upside possibilities where next year could be better than our forecast, as well as downside risks that where we could actually miss the mark. And some examples include inflation. So if inflation continues to retreat with no recession, we could see a gain in consumer and business confidence that will stimulate the economy. And on the other hand, if inflation returns to the higher levels that we saw last year, and the Fed is forced to take even more drastic actions, the opposite will likely occur. And further, high interest rates combined with the unprecedented record-setting levels of consumer debt that are currently in the economy, that could further derail the economy if unemployment were to rise next year. Additionally, there are factors that impact our economy that the Fed can't control, and that would include things like COVID infections. If COVID infections remain low and under control, then that would support the economy. If they were to rise, and that would impact travel and the supply chain, that would definitely negatively impact the economy. And as we are very heavily invested in aerospace in this community, the health of the travel industry is very important to us. So that concludes the information I've prepared on our revenue forecasts for this evening. We'll be presenting additional detail at the September 20th Revenue and Expense Workshop in September. And at this point, I would like to answer any questions before we move on to the budget development update.
Any questions? Okay, move forward.
Okay, and before I get started, I think that the mayor wanted to say a couple of words.
Sure. Thank you, Susie and Heidi. First, a huge thank you to Susie and Heidi and Lori and our entire team, our directors that have been working for months and months on the budget. I'm not going to deliver my full budget message, don't worry. You'll have to wait for that in September. But I did want to just highlight a couple of priorities that are reflected in this and share that on a very positive note, we are presenting this evening a balanced 2024 budget due to the incredible work of our team. So thank you both and everyone else that's been working on this. A couple of the priorities that we focused on in drafting this budget is public safety and human needs. Those are, as you all talk to our residents, that's what we hear over and over again as their top priorities is what are we doing in public safety safety, and what are we doing to address the incredible needs in our community. So this budget reflects some investments in public safety that we plan to initiate this year with your support. Also, with the tight labor market, especially in the field of police and fire, we want to make sure that we are not disrupting services by large vacancies, so making sure that we are doing everything we can to recruit and retain our team members. The budget also includes investments in our programs and grants and services to help support our most vulnerable populations. Obviously, the fentanyl epidemic is, and behavioral health crisis is so severe, and that needs to be one of our top priorities and will continue to be. But the budget, again, is balanced with very difficult choices that we had to make. We still have a structural deficit. We still have that 1% cap on property tax, and the costs of running our city goes up every year. And so in order to not reduce services and to ensure that our priorities of public health and safety could be met, we have some, unsustainable choices that we don't want to continue to make, that we've also made in the past, which Susie will go over. But again, those choices were made so that we can retain the service levels that I think our residents rely on for all of the work in parks and library and animals and everything that we do as a city, and also ensure that public health and safety remains a top priority. So look forward to further discussions as we go through this process, and also into next year. As we start to think about our budget for 2025, I look forward to working with this council to bring forward a ballot measure for our residents to consider to make investments in the financial sustainability of all the work that the city does. And so that'll be our work coming forward. But thank you again to the team for getting our budget balanced at this point.
Thank you. So as the mayor just mentioned, the 2024 budget includes significant proposed investments in public safety, including the addition of 9 uniformed officers, a wellness coordinator, and a public disclosure specialist. 7 of the 9 officers will be mostly funded by the COPS grant, and 2 will be funded for 2 years by the new Skagit Academy. The selection of these 2 officers to head up the new academy demonstrates the police department's position as a regional leader in law enforcement, and we do anticipate that this will bring the additional capacity, will improve the pace that we can get our new recruits through the academy and serving the community.
I'm just gonna, for those who aren't more deeply familiar with it, the leadership of those 2 people, the cost is backfilled, but the real benefit, or a significant benefit, Chief Templeman had said, for devoting those 2 officers to that is that increases the number of our slots in the training academy, and that's one of the bottlenecks we have in terms of getting police out in the community. So that's a high leverage thing and a thing to admire the department for.
Absolutely. A new wellness coordinator is proposed for the police department, and this coordinator will expand on current wellness tools already in place, such as the employee wellness visit program, peer support, police chaplaincy program, and the employee assistance program. Focusing on officer wellness will support partnerships and problem solving, community relations, and employee retention. An additional public disclosure specialist is proposed to help process the increase in requests stemming from the body-worn camera program. And we have also included $90,000 to continue the lateral incentive hiring program to maintain our competitive position with other agencies in the region.
Susie,
Tui has a
I have one
question.
quick question on the COPS grant. Will this 2024 be the final year of us seeing revenue from that grant?
Actually, it'll be the final year that we're hiring the officers. We hope to hire them this year and/or next year. And the revenue for each officer is for 3 years from the date of hire. So for officers that we're hiring this year or next year, it would be 3 years from that date.
But I believe this is the final year we can use these dollars.
That's
right?
correct,
So,
to get full use out of the grant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If we
Okay,
don't,
so
if we
we'll
don't use them
see
now, we'll
some of
lose
that
them.
offset the next couple years if we can hopefully get them hired.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
The tight labor market is impacting the city's ability to recruit and retain the skilled workforce that we need to deliver services. The 2024 budget includes investments in market rate adjustments for key positions to help the city better compete. There have also been a couple of reorganizations that have impacted staff's roles and responsibilities. The proposed budget also includes moving these team members to the appropriate range to align with their compensation with their new duties.
Susie, are those market rate adjustments for new positions that we're hiring?
Their existing positions.
Okay, but, and so we have some sense that we're not able to retain employees?
That's correct.
So HR does a periodic review of different positions throughout the city and compares to other municipalities, other public works departments or whatever, depending on what positions they are, and kind of certain areas where we have a sense that we might be losing, we might lose people to another area. So we can't make market rate adjustments across the city as we would like to, but we do target areas that have not been as competitive, where, like, let's say we've been losing people in one certain area, or somebody has new duties now and they're actually doing the work of a manager and they were only being paid as a coordinator, and so then HR will do a study and make those adjustments.
And so these are not represented employees?
Some of them, I don't think.
I think they're all appointed employees.
Appointed employees, okay. Will we see the list of
With the
those?
exception of the IT ones. Thank you, Heidi. We do have some IT positions that are represented.
Okay. And will we see the list of those positions that are being adjusted?
They will be certainly published in the budget under the budget changes with each narrative. So the list of
Okay,
budget changes.
Under each department? Okay, thank you.
So to ensure full funding in 2024, this budget also proposes to fund our human needs programs next year with a transfer from the COVID Relief Fund. It also includes an additional $100,000 in human needs grant funding, and these grants go to support the most vulnerable people in our city. In addition to public safety positions noted earlier, other positions are proposed to be added and part-time hours expanded in several departments to meet service demands. This includes 9.35 FTEs in 2023 and 3.5 FTEs in 2024. The 23 additions include the embedded mental health professionals for the fire department and the library, and a limited-term administrative assistant for community development, which are all supported in 2024 by a revenue offset from the COVID relief program in Fund 155.
Susie, I'm sorry, on the last slide, you mentioned the human needs grants, but at the Claire's Place support, are also planning on using is that the ARPA funds, sort of converted?
The former
Funds.
ARPA funds, now they're local funds, and we're calling that the COVID relief program. And these 5 expenditures that we typically fund through the general fund, we're proposing to bring in support from the COVID relief fund to ensure that we do have funding to continue them into 24, because they are important programs. But as you'll see as I move through the balancing presentation, balancing this budget was a struggle, trying to maintain services. So we did have to come up with some creative solutions to ensure that we could continue those into 2024.
We were, and just add, we, as a city, and we talked about this here, we focused our ARPA dollars almost entirely outward from the city, right? Most municipalities used those to backfill revenue losses that their municipality experienced, and so just sucked it into the general fund and went on to do that work. We chose to try to put them all out in the community, and we've been successful at doing that with most of them. Again, balancing this budget was really hard, so as we were working to balance it, we said, okay, if we have to try to use any of that, let's make sure that we're using it for those outward-facing community programs, and let's increase our investments there to ensure that we're putting those dollars to good work, and not just using them to backfill salaries or other city losses, but using them to support the community.
So the Claire's Place support, 200,000, is that something that was that the funds we had committed to when they built the place? Or is that like for counseling services or something? I can't remember exactly the deal.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Okay. And the senior center, how long is the senior center contract funding required? Because we had like a tapering off of that, didn't we?
It is. Has been tapering off. I think it was over a period of 5 years, I think it was. And I know it started at over 500,000 was our initial year of support, and now we're down to 300. And the idea is that over time, VOA would be able to develop their own funding support for that facility, that program.
Okay. And then the rent support, that's kind of an interfund transfer, is that correct?
Yes, so
We're
we
paying-
do have to pay transit for
Yeah.
the rent, and that is for the Bezos.
And we're committed to that in perpetuity, is that correct? Will they ever pay rent?
I do not believe that their business plan provides for that, so yes.
Okay, and then Alliance for Housing Affordability. I'm not familiar with those dues. Is that just our portion?
It's an organization that the city is part of, and this is just the annual dues for that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, sorry.
Yeah, my question, so good.
Good. Okay. So, in addition to the public safety positions noted earlier, as I mentioned, we plan to add 9.35 FTEs in '23 and 3.5 in '24. The '23 ads include those mental health professionals for the fire department and the library, and a limited-term administrative assistant for community development. Those positions are all supported in '24 by revenue offset from the COVID relief program. Those are all programs that were approved by the council resolution, and we do budget our staffing in the departments that they work in, and so the contribution from the COVID relief program is in the form of a transfer into the general fund to pay for those salaries.
And the mid-year additions, I'm not familiar with what those are. Have we already approved those?
We'll be bringing those forward in budget amendment number 2, which is coming up next week.
Okay.
The briefing.
So and this also is funded, this revenue offset, is that funding from the COVID relief funds?
Yes, because those are positions that were part of those programs.
Yeah, there are things council approved, like the social workers.
Yeah.
So the social workers we brought that forward as a COVID program, that we were adding social workers in the library and fire departments. Council approved that we could work on that COVID program. We've hired those folks that have started that work, but we just haven't brought forward the budget amendment for your approval. And the other types of positions that are not COVID funded are things like our government affairs director and other things that throughout the year we've added.
Okay, thank you.
There are some significant cost increases anticipated for several line items that must be funded, notably jail fees, which, as Heidi noted, will be included in budget amendment number 3. We have tort claims, property and liability insurance premiums, and workers' compensation claims. Those are going up significantly. IT software maintenance contracts, as we get new software or experience increases in the existing software maintenance contracts, that is going up also notably. And the numbers on this slide together represent about $2.5 million in growth in the '24 budget. Our revenue forecast definitely brought good news to the budget development process. However, achieving a balanced budget without costs, as the mayor mentioned, still required more than $9.5 million in unsustainable balancing measures. We suspended the Left One pension contributions for one more year. We suspended the annual contribution to CIP1, and to backfill that reduction, we plan to add $3 million to the upcoming general obligation bond issue that will fund the Underwater Bridge replacement, the EMB remodel, Eclipse Mill Park development, and the Lowell Riverfront Trail expansion. We will propose to bring in one-time funding to support the city's human needs programs, as we discussed on a prior slide, and we included a potential draw from the rainy day fund.
Question.
Yes, go
Yeah,
ahead.
thanks. Currently, what is the actuary balance for the Left One fund? you
There
know?
is, in the fire pension fund, there's about 28 million, and I want to say 16 million in the police fire pension fund. We still have significant accumulated balances, which we're all very grateful that we were able to build those up in prior years. Certainly is the financially prudent thing to do to try to fund these costs ahead. I'll tell you that most cities are on a pay-as-you-go basis. So the city is in a good position with that. The current funding target date is 2030 to be fully funded. And, that could be the topic of another discussion of the Budget Committee as to that target date and where we go from here. The annual contributions, as you can see, well, in '24, they're almost 5 million, and they grow from there. So 25, I believe, is at least 5 million, and that represents a significant commitment of annual contributions in any year in order to reach that 2030 target. So that would be another thing for council to be considering moving forward.
Susie, when was the last time we made the contribution? I feel like we've suspended it for several years running.
Actually, it was only, we suspended this year, and then we're proposing to suspend last year. In 2022, we actually made the contribution, and we made a small amount of catch-up from the prior year, from COVID.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, so you did answer my question about 2030. That's when the actuaries, we're figuring out that we're going to have it fully funded to deal with the liability. So at that point, the idea is that we wouldn't have to contribute anything. The revenue from the fund would pay for the liability.
Yes,
correct?
that's correct.
Yeah. And so also a question about CIP 1. Could you just give a little history on how we've underfunded that?
Certainly.
Yeah.
So we created CIP1 in 2016, and the purpose of CIP1 is to accumulate funding to pay for major renovations, major repairs of the existing facilities, the things that we already own now, as opposed to buying new facilities or expanding facilities to something bigger. In 2018 or 2019, we commissioned a study. Ming Associates, I believe, were the consultants that did that, and they did an analysis of all of our facilities and came up with a rather daunting list of deficiencies that we need to take care of. And the study actually suggested that we should be contributing about $6 million a year to the general government facilities to get them sort of back into better operational condition. And we have been currently funding it to $3 million a year because $6 million is just outside of our reach.
Thank you. And then I guess one last question about the rainy day fund. By statute, is there a cost of living increase in the amount of money that we can keep in our rainy day fund?
Well, it's actually tied to our assessed value. We can keep up to, I'm trying to remember the exact It's like 20, it's either 22 or 32.5 cents per $1,000 of assessed value. We currently have about $4.7 million in our rainy day fund. The actual cap, according to RCW, that we could put in there is actually, I think, closer to 8. And so we do have some capacity to build it up, but we don't have the resources at this time to be putting additional money in there, unfortunately.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions?
He asked my question
Okay,
on the
very
rainy
good.
day fund.
Thank you.
Okay, so I will close, as I typically do, with the revised six-year forecast. The good news is that the '24 budget is balanced, and the projected deficit for 2025 of $11.7 million represents a $10 million reduction from the prior '25 forecast. So the improvement that we're seeing in revenues is having an impact. Unfortunately, it's just not enough. The hole that we're in is sufficiently deep to where even this level of improvement that we're seeing in the economy is not resolving our structural deficit. And we also need to keep in mind that an $11.7 million deficit, though being much better than a $22 million deficit, it still represents an enormous hill to climb when you consider how lean our departments are running and how many departments really struggle to deliver the public services with the resources that they currently have. So any further cuts to department would definitely require a reduction in services. So,
Susie,
yeah.
can I just add we didn't increase M&O for most departments. Staff costs just go up dramatically, right? As they should, right? Our workforce is our most important asset, and they are represented and get increases every year as they need to retain and have a exceptional workforce. But that means the money that we have to provide services outside of our staff is less and less every year. So we have less and less money to do anything else in the departments. And so it's not just our workforce that's lean, it's the rest of the budget. There's not any fat in it, which again means that we'll have some work to do next year to balance this. That is probably outside of our ability alone without a vote of the people.
Yes, Councilmember Zarlingo.
And one thing related to that, given some of the people I've been talking to recently, is that leanness in planning and permitting can make it difficult to get economic development done, the building that supports that economic development. And the other wrinkle on that is that some of that leanness lengthens things, which can make the processes we do have less efficient and further delay things and further increase costs. So I'm hoping I think there's going to be additional investment in that, and I think that truly is an investment because it'll bring in money, not just cost. And maybe reduce the cost to build in Everett a little bit, which can help reduce housing costs.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
I think that brings us to the close of the information that I have for you tonight. And if there's any other questions, of course, we'd be happy to address them or provide follow-up.
I'm just curious, Susie, what percentage inflation do you show year after year on your expenses?
It depends on the type of expense.
Okay.
You know, our model is sufficiently detailed enough to where we
Okay.
have it by line item, but, it can be anywhere from, we certainly didn't project the 10.1% inflation we got last year. But, on a normal basis, ongoing basis, they generally average more around 3%. Some of them are up to 5% for some of those other expenses that are quite outside our control.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Susie, will you remind us next steps on, so the budget is coming forward when?
So the mayor will present her budget message on September 20th, and I will follow that with also on September 20th with the revenue and expenditure briefing on that. It's also a public hearing, by the way. And after that, we will be delivering the proposed budget binders to council on the 13th of October. And following that, the next step would be our property tax ordinance. We'll have 3 readings of that, starting in October and ending in early November. And then we'll have the budget hearings, which we will have concurrent with the readings of the budget ordinance in the middle to the end of November. We'll have a 3rd and final budget amendment for '23, starting at the end of November and finishing mid-December, and that will finish our year.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other questions or comments?
I just want to add a thank you to Councilmember Ryan and Councilmember Tui, who provided some input and feedback to help us with some of the priorities, so thank you.
Thank you. Well, with no further business, we are now adjourned. Thank you.
Food, a lot of cool fire pits and fireplaces in this area. And then on the other side, we'll have South Fork Bakery, who's just bringing the sweets to the waterfront. We're also targeting a breakfast cafe, an ice cream, and some destination spa and